Hello to all of our listeners, and welcome back to The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. I'm your host, Kimberly. As an alternative educator, I'm honestly all about taking your kids out of the system completely. But for a lot of parents, that's not an option for a variety of reasons. And this being The Parent Solution, I'd like to present as many solutions for as many parents as I can, rather than just a specific niche. And so here today, I have a very special guest with me. She's chatting about advocacy within the public and to some extent the private schooling system, specifically what we as parents and educators can do to foster a better school and parent relationship. Melissa Lowry is currently the principal of Christ the King School in Buckhead, Georgia. She was previously the principal of Holy Family Catholic School in South Pasadena, California. Melissa has taught in early childhood, elementary, and middle school classrooms, and has also served as a curriculum director. She is the founder and director of Melissa Lowry Education Coaching, which helps parents and educators build and maintain strong home and school relationships. Melissa is the co-author of Answer Keys, Teacher Lesson Plans for Successful Parenting. She provides distance and virtual learning coaching services for students in grades K to 12. She organizes and manages home learning plans so that parents can be free of the stress that's associated with homeschooling, and works with students K to 12 in order to develop strong executive functioning skills. Melissa, hello.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure this is.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you on today's podcast with me, especially talking about this particular topic, and I'm sure we'll get into a few other ones along the way. Maybe to start, do you mind sharing a little bit about your experience within the public education system?
So my experience within the public education system has come not from being a teacher, but from being an advocate. And that is both in private practice with my consulting business and then as a school principal, because oftentimes when our students need to receive student services through the public school system, which does happen in the United States, they need to have an advocate from said school. And a lot of times in Catholic schools, it would be the principal or the curriculum director, of which I've been both, who is the person who attends those types of advocacy meetings to ensure that students, especially those with language-based learning disabilities, auditory discrimination issues, things of that nature, are getting the services that they need through the public school system, or helping a student in our school if we can't work with them to transition to the public school, and just in general, helping parents also to understand how to advocate for their children as well.
And I love the idea, this idea of advocating within the public schooling system, of working with the system that you have to try to maximize the benefits that you can get from it, or to maximize, in this case, we're talking about the learning potential for children. Have you worked with a lot of children? You mentioned, like, especially when it comes to learning disabilities and language-related disabilities.
So I have, from this standpoint, by no means am I what I would consider to be a specialist with students with learning disabilities. My master's degree is in literacy and language arts, and basically that was training as like a reading specialist. And so the idea there is that you are providing a certain level of intervention for students who are having difficulty acquiring reading skills or phonics or things like that. But and I have gone through all of the Orton Gillingham training, and Orton Gillingham is probably the best approach, and it's a multisensory approach to teaching phonics. And all of the teachers at Christ the King are all trained and or certified in Orton Gillingham. So I've done all the training through the associate level. I am not a certified associate because I haven't done all the practical work, because I'm actually an administrator. But that's where the background is. So we have a deep understanding of how to approach phonics instruction for students with dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities, but we are not a school, let's say, that specializes in that. Christ the King is a mainstream Catholic school. We just know that Orton Gillingham is just good teaching. It doesn't matter if the students have a disability or not. The Orton Gillingham approach to teaching phonics is just the gold standard, and it's just good teaching all the way around. So I would say, yes, I have experience there. I also, one of my own children is dyslexic, so I've worked through the system that way as well. But I would by no means call myself like a specialist in that area. There are definitely people that we work with that have far more experience and background working with students with language-based learning disabilities than I do.
Mm-hmm. It's always good to have what you might term as a quote unquote expert, because that's like their specialized field. They've like gone to school, they have all of this book knowledge, etc. But I'm not undermining the experience either, right? Like you can have so much book knowledge, but then have zero experience. And I would honestly value the experience over all of the book knowledge, to be honest. And that's just my opinion. I'm not discrediting one or the other. I think they're both equally important. So I think that's awesome that you do what you do. And you were a principal, a high school principal, is that correct?
Not high school. So the way the Catholic school system works in the United States is most of the schools are kindergarten through eighth grade, which means you're starting with students who are about 5 years old, and then they graduate when they're about 14. Some Catholic schools have a pre-K. When I taught early childhood, I was in I was in an Episcopal school. But most Catholic schools are going to be K-8. And then the bulk of the phonics instruction is going to take place from kindergarten up through about second grade. You might see some phonics instruction in third grade. Orton Gillingham definitely goes up that high, but I would say that the school that I'm at, we're kind of running at a little bit of an accelerated pace. So most of the time they're able to get to the levels of Orton Gillingham by the end of second grade.
I have heard, and I do use some of the principles and some of the tools and techniques from Orton Gillingham, but that's something that I myself, as an educator, particularly an alternative educator, am still sort of learning about. So it's I had no idea that your school did that. It's really awesome to hear that, to be honest. Do you in your school, do you have a specific sort of curriculum that you follow? I assume if it's a Catholic school, you're following the Catholic curriculum, right?
So yes and no. We follow the Georgia state standards. So I'm in Atlanta. Buckhead is a part of Atlanta, Georgia. So we are in the southeastern United States, kind of just above Florida. And we will follow the state standards, and then we layer on top of that whatever we want out of our own Catholic school standards. So religion sort of standalone on its own, although we weave, different tenets of Catholicism throughout the curriculum. But basically, the Georgia state standards don't call for Orton Gillingham. And I'm not saying that there aren't public schools that utilize it. I'm just saying that that's not, the standards are different than saying you have to use a certain textbook company or a certain approach to something. So what we're doing is we had been using a couple of different things. We've been using something called Recipe for Reading and something called Reading Street, but they are great resources, but they had kind of been out of print and we really couldn't find them any longer. So this past year, we did a curriculum reevaluation in our K-2, and we had an Orton Gillingham fellow in training come in and work with with our teachers over the course of the year to sort of reorient our approach, which letters we teach first, how we do that, when we bring in blends and all, other things in phonics instruction. And we decided to go with Zahner Blaser. I can't remember. And it's called Super Kids. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be adopting Super Kids as the baseline for our phonics. Then we also are purchasing the Scholastic K-5 leveled reader library, so that we will have the different leveled readers for all of the grade levels K-5. And even if middle school needs to dip down, they certainly can. Because Super Kids, what we've heard, we haven't taught it yet, is that it has awesome stuff, but that sometimes it can pace a little bit more on the slow end, and our kids have a tendency to be a little bit accelerated. Now, with the pandemic, everyone's having a bit of I would call it a COVID hangover, where we're seeing kids are coming in with deficits in some areas, although we're seeing a lot of that as social emotional more than it is an academic issue. But that aside, so we're layering the Scholastic on top of that, and then we're reviewing all of our handwriting at the same time, because Super Kids has a handwriting element, and we still teach cursive writing starting in second grade, so that's really part of our curriculum. Mm-hmm. So we're reevaluating that as well. And so it's going to be like a multi-year process, because then we'll keep going up and looking at novel studies and things of that nature. But as far as phonics, we are starting with Super Kids this coming year, and then with the Scholastic guided and leveled readers.
You sound like you have a very structured approach to being able to support your teachers, for sure, giving them the sorts of curriculum and actual materials that they need. I know that it's not always the same for all school districts, so your teachers sound like they should be very happy to be in your school, to be that supported.
Well, I think it's a little bit honestly the other way around, Kimberly, from the standpoint that I said to someone else, if I had a superpower, or my superpower is that I am really good at surrounding myself with people who are smarter than I am and better at things than I am. And I'm just very fortunate to be working with a group of professionals who are really, really dedicated to their students and dedicated to their craft and their profession. And so I didn't choose super kids. It was a group of our teachers that got together that were dedicated and took some extra time. Like, we came in on a Saturday when we evaluated curriculum, and they decided that this is what they wanted. And then I just got to be the cool person who provided the money through the budget to be able to, acquire said materials. But the part I enjoyed is it was teacher directed. And I feel like as an educational leader, we kind of have a little bit of like an archaic model in schools. You have this like one person at the top, the principal, and then it's sort of like trickle down. And that's not how it should work, because we have teachers that have been teaching. I mean, I've been doing this like 25 years or something, but I mean, one of our teachers retired last year at like 80. And I mean, she had far more experience than I did. And who was I to not listen to her? And so I think that the collective wisdom of the teaching faculty where I am is amazing. And they're the ones driving the process. And what's great is there's a ton of buy-in in the adoption of this program, because they're the ones who made the decision that this is what they wanted to do, and that how they wanted to approach the integration of the supplemental materials, that scholastic program as well. And so they're all excited about it, and that gets me excited to support them. So it's really like sort of it's a group effort.
It's a team effort. But I love how you are listening to the teachers, because so often, I mean, and not in my experience, but so often I see, you're right, this archaic model in schools, or in even just how we run the idea of schools, and everything is like a top down model. So as you say, right, like a pyramid almost, you have this person at the top, or these people at the top that are controlling everything, that in reality know absolutely nothing about education. And like, obviously that's not you, but that's like, speaking from a larger perspective, right? You have people at the top who know absolutely nothing about education and how to run things. I love that, like, you're taking your system and your school and saying, okay, this is a team effort. We're going to make this work for the kids. And now you have your teachers, you have all of that, like you say, your collective wisdom and the collective, the buy-in, because they are now involved in what they're teaching, and they're believing in what they are teaching, and in the effectiveness, because they've seen it. So I think that's amazing that you're able to do that. That is such a team effort.
Well, I would really credit sort of, so the public school system in the United States, like, they work in what's called like a school district. So our school sits within Atlanta Public School District. But because we're a Catholic school, we're part of what's called an archdiocese. So I'm part of the our school is part of the Archdiocese of Atlanta. So we have a superintendent, just like a public school system would have. But I really do credit our superintendent with allowing a level of autonomy within the schools. And this was in California. The superintendent at the time that I was the principal in California, it was the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. It was the same thing. They gave the schools a lot of autonomy to serve their specific populations. And I would say that my friends that are teaching in the public school, what's difficult is a lot of the decisions are made out of like a central office, right? And in the Atlanta public school system, they're serving 55,000 children at how many elementary schools? And so a one size fits all approach is sort of what's coming out of a central office, but it doesn't necessarily, and I understand some of the need for that. I hate to sort of criticize what other people are doing because I'm not in their system. But what I would say is it makes it hard when you have a group of people, as you had pointed out, making decisions that aren't on the school site. And so our superintendent and the approach of the Archdiocese of Atlanta is really to allow the schools a level of autonomy. So we can adopt at Christ the King whatever phonics program we want, as long as we're following our standards. And so we adopted Super Kids, whereas a principal I spoke to at another school, they were just phasing out of it. They felt it was time to change. They liked the program, but they felt it was time to change. And so we're not restricted in following what someone else does, which is really nice, because the population that Christ the King serves may look very different than another Catholic school 45 minutes away. And if those two schools, let's say one of our schools has a larger immigrant population that has students with English as a second language, they're going to need to look at a different phonics approach than a school that has a monolingual English speaking population. And so to be able to make those individual choices is something that I really respect about our leadership within the Catholic school system. And there are certain things we have to do and as a collective body, but for the most part, we've had autonomy. And even during the pandemic, our superintendent gave schools a certain level of autonomy when it came to masks and different things, because we had different needs within our community, different size classrooms, different ventilation, lots of different things going on. And I think it helped us to be successful during a really, really difficult time.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I'm totally on the page, on the same page. I think that it's very much valued to be able to give that autonomy to schools. Not all schools get that sort of autonomy and get that level of decision making. And I'm really a very large advocate for like personal responsibility, right? It shouldn't be a huge state concern. I believe that that's correct the way that they're doing it, giving each school the autonomy to decide, okay, this is what's best for our population. And within that, I would trust that, you're very involved with the teachers. And you would want to be very involved with the parents, or the teachers want to be very involved with the parents. Have you, within the last 2 years in particular, because you mentioned that because of everything going on, there was a little bit of a difference, and that you could have certain discrepancies and different rules and regulations that were there. Did you find that parents are in your school anyways are wanting to be very involved with helping to make regulations for the school and helping to be involved with the teachers and with their child's education?
Oh, absolutely. That's, I think, probably one of the cornerstones of Catholic education is the expectation of parent involvement. And so whenever we hire a new teacher, I mean, that's a lot of what I talk about is what type of environment are you looking for? Because our environment at Christ the King is very unique. Like if you're looking for a school where you kind of punch in and punch out, I'm like, this is definitely not the place to be, because we're very collaborative. We have 3 classes per grade. Nobody plans on their own. Everybody plans collaboratively and makes decisions together. And sometimes that can, cause cognitive dissonance and disequilibrium and debates and different things. But healthy debate is a good thing. You can't have that groupthink where everyone's just constantly agreeing with one another and, braiding each other's hair and stuff. You have to have some healthy, pushback discussion. But our parents are fantastic. They are very involved. We have school advisory council. They help with strategic plan. There are times when it's frustrating because just because someone's a lawyer or doctor doesn't mean they know more than I do. And, every once in a while you have parents who think just because I'm an executive in this area, I must know better than you. And when you're dealing with people's kids, they get worked up.
Yes.
So there are some complexities that come along with the school where there's a lot of parental involvement, but I would say that the pros far outweigh the cons. And something that we sort of are is part of our culture is we are a culture and community of caring. That's how we lead at Christ the King. And before anything else, academics or anything else, we are a culture and community of caring. Now, for us, that obviously to a certain extent comes out of our Catholic beliefs, but I think that it also comes from a place of sort of servant leadership and respect, where everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And that's including them in the conversation, whether it's the teachers making decisions about adopting textbooks or the parents helping to make decisions about service projects that we involve ourselves in, or whether it's even our teaching assistants that I meet with on a pretty regular basis to get their viewpoint of what they're seeing. Because I don't know, I mean, maybe some administrators would disagree with me, and that's fine. But my feeling is there's not one person in the school environment where I am who's more important than someone else. Like I am not any more important than a teaching assistant or a custodian. I just have a different role to play. But if the custodian doesn't play his or her role well, then we don't have clean bathrooms and sanitary places for our students and our faculty. If a teaching assistant does not show up at the yard duty, then our kids are in danger. If a teacher isn't doing, A, B, C, or D, then the system starts to fall apart and the organization falls apart. And so this idea that the principal or the assistant principal or whatever is more important than somebody else is, in my opinion, I think that that's the wrong approach to take personally. And I think that it's even the same with parents. Like, we need to be bringing parents in and not pushing them out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't speak for the school structure in particular. I am on the same page. I do agree. I think that the whole body kind of, and it's funny, like the idea of the Catholic school, I know that somewhere in the Bible, and don't ask me to quote where, but somewhere in the Bible, I know that it says that Christ is the head, right? And the church acts as the body, and like no one part is more important than the other. And then they talk about, I think it was Jesus who was talking actually. And he said that, just because the hand, like, does the hand not know what the foot is doing, right? This idea of collective ability to be able to do something positive, and that everybody works together as a whole. So it's not funny, but it's funny that as a Catholic school, you've sort of modeled that same approach of like, this is the body and we all work together for one common purpose, right? So to me, that's admirable.
You sound so much more profound. You sound so much more profound than me. That was excellent.
that's just it's because I'm an English major, honestly.
Fantastic. I'm going to feel that, just so you know. Like,
okay,
beg, borrow, and steal. I'm taking that back with me. That was excellent.
No problem. That's for the next meeting, the next important administration meeting that goes on. You're welcome. No, but for real, I think it's awesome that you have the advocacy and that you're so involved, and that your whole school really is so involved with the parents. I know that in terms of like the public school, not everyone is. I know the Catholic system is slightly better. I would say, in my personal opinion, is slightly better than the public school, just because of that approach that they have, where a lot of Catholic schools have that sort of mindset. From what I've seen. So that's amazing. Would you say that in your school that you have that you have a high level of parents wanting to actually change what their kids are learning, or are they just wanting to weigh in on what's going on and be involved in the learning process?
That's a great question. I have not personally in my tenure at the school had parents that are sort of meddling in the curriculum. And I think that's because at the end of the day, so our kids, once they leave after 8th grade, they go into either Catholic high school or a private high school or a public high school. And our kids get in. We had 100% acceptance rate last year.
Awesome.
And so I think that if it's not broken, don't fix it, where parents understand that we are, I wouldn't say experts, but we're specialists in our field. And that's what they're paying us to do. And so I would say that the parents that I'm working with are very good about the curriculum. I'd see where we see more challenges is, I think that parents today, and I'm a parent too, I have one that's going to be a senior in high school and one that's going to be a freshman in high school, that there's a lot of pressure for kids to perform today. And I think sometimes parents feeling that pressure and stress and having some anxiety, they push back at the grading system, if anything. Like, why is my child earning, a C on this? And what I try and tell parents all the time is a C is actually average mastery of material, average mastery. And somehow, I don't know if it's just where we are located here in Buckhead, Georgia, but a C is like failing. And it's like, no, a C is not failing. It is average mastery, but not everyone can be a straight A student. And I think sometimes there's this unrealistic expectation that our kids are going to be able to play an instrument and be number one on the basketball team and do service projects and get straight A's. And I'm like, did any of you get straight A's? Because I didn't always get straight A's. I mean, we're good at certain things. We're not great at other things. And childhood is a time to, I call it, like, you date around and you try things on. It's like you go to a store and there's 1,000 dresses and you're just going to try them all on, or 100 pair of pants, and you're going to figure out what fits and what's comfortable and what you like and what dress do you want to buy 100 times. And sometimes I think that our parents get so anxious that their kids aren't going to get into high school or they're not going to get into college, that they get fixated on the grade. And so I don't feel that we get questioned on the curriculum, but I do think that sometimes we get questioned on the grading system and why, certain kids get placed in this math class, or why didn't my kid get this, or da 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 da. And those are just tough conversations you have to have. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they go the way we want them to. Sometimes someone's not particularly happy with us, but we're there to serve the children. And I'm not going to put a child in a class where he or she's going to fail because they're not ready for it. I'm not going to give a child a grade because he's a nice kid. No, because I'm not serving the child then. So that's, most of our parents know that, but sometimes they get frustrated.
Right. I love it though. Like that's a motto of mine, is that it's not about what exactly you are getting. It's not the grade that's be all and end all. And really kids these days, I mean, in the public schooling system, are for the most part not allowed to fail. They can't fail kids anymore. Here in Canada anyways, they can't fail kids anymore. And they just push them through. They give them like a just passing grade. And they push them through, and that's not really doing the child a service at all. It's doing them a disservice, because you're just telling that child that like it's the same mentality as everyone gets a participating trophy medal, and like not everyone can be good at everything all the time, and that is okay. But I think a lot of parents, but a lot of people also have that mentality, is that we have to perform, we have to do, we have to be and go and like I'm the last person to say that I'm perfect with that, because everybody has this sort of expectation that they're going to perform, and we have these high expectations of ourselves, but we fail to realize that like you don't have to be good at everything. And even as adults, sometimes I think that's tough for us to realize. Imagine the disservice that you're doing to your child if you're putting them under those expectations.
Yes, because then what happens is, what I've seen with some kids is then a couple of things can happen. One is they develop a level of anxiety, and that anxiety just eats at people. And that's not, it's not good to be anxious all the time. Sometimes anxiety and stress can be good because they fuel you. But if you've got that underlying level of it all the time, that's not good for anybody's mental health. And it's actually not good for your physical health. So that can happen. The second is, you almost invite, I don't want to call it depression, but a little bit of that from the standpoint that if the expectation is that you should be good at everything, when we already know that that's unrealistic, then kids are always living up to an expectation that they'll never be able to fulfill. And that's something that as an educator really irritates me. And I try and shift the focus away from like being perfect at everything versus did you better yourself from the last time? Because we can't control everything that happens. We actually can control very little of what happens in our lives, but we can control our reactions to things and then how we move on from that experience. And so I like to work with my students on that a lot, because I do think that we're pushing them into this place where they're going to be unhappy if they think they have to be a certain way all the time. And then, social media just exacerbates that, right? Because everyone like filters themselves and just makes their life look perfect. And then everyone's comparing each other. And for young minds, that's not necessarily a healthy way to grow and mature. It's not.
Leaving the social media out of it for a second, because I mean that's a whole other podcast in itself, to be honest with you. But I always say, I say to my students when we, usually when we first start working together, and like they all know better now, but I say to them, practice makes. What do you think they say?
They try and say perfect, but you're like, no, practice makes it
but
perfect.
I'm like, but what, sorry?
I said practice actually makes imperfect is what I like to say, but.
Oh, okay. I like to say practice makes progress. That's but
I mean,
that's the same.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the same sort of mentality. Practice makes imperfect, but I always say practice makes progress. So now they know when they screw up on something, or they don't do as well as they thought they would do, like it is okay to not do as well. Hey, it's okay that you got a C. It's okay that you got a C plus. It's okay that you got a B minus. It's all right. First of all, we have to remember grades are not everything. And second of all, you have to remember that all it's doing is giving you the skill set to be able to do harder things later on. And I think that that's a really big thing that a lot of people are missing. And I think a lot of parents are sort of waking up to this idea now of teaching their child skills rather than teaching their child book knowledge, because book knowledge is not always going to get you anywhere. It's important, yes, because it opens the doors for certain opportunities, but it's not the be all and end all, right? Like learning skills and learning a skill set that you can have for the rest of your life, things like discipline and integrity and work ethic, that's important as well. And I would argue that it's just as important, if not more, because if you can have all the work in the world, but if you have no work ethic, you're not going to get any of it done.
Right. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's a lot of great work out there by like Carol Dweck out of Stanford, who, is kind of the mastermind behind the growth mindset. And you've got Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, and they've done a lot of research into sort of book smarts and kids who have just been told, oh, you're smart, versus kids who have been given tools. And that open growth mindset of like, hey, it's not about whether or not you're smart. It's about whether or not you have perseverance and resilience, and you're able to kind of keep at something. As you said, practice makes progress until you start to progress in that area. And some of that research, especially from Dweck, is extremely interesting because they found that when they phrased it certain ways, so they told like a group of kids, you're smart, those kids were far less likely to take risks than the students that they were using the growth mindset with, and they were focused more on the effort level and sort of the strategies they were using, and then that metacognitive process, that thinking about thinking. Those kids ended up taking far more risks because they didn't feel that anxiety of like, oh, I've been told I'm good, and so I just have to keep going at this. And I do think for a while, at least in the United States, our pendulum had sort of swung toward this, we have to give the kids self-esteem. So it was, you're so great, you're so this, kind of like stroking them. And it actually, I think, had a real detrimental effect, because then the kids just didn't expect to have to work. Whereas I know growing up, my parents like never told me I was that smart. And I mean, they were great. I have great parents, but it was never about how great I was. It was about, well, if I got a B, it was like, why isn't it an A? And I mean, it was all about the work. I mean, totally.
Yep.
And I wasn't a straight student, but it was constantly about the like, well, what are you doing to put more effort in? How are you changing what you're doing, mess up, and And so there was no quitting, right? There was just no quitting. And I think that we've got a lot of kids, and I see it in my own school, who, if they don't get something the first time, they just kind of want to put their hands up and quit. And I'm like, wait a second. You need like 70 more tries before you got that. I mean, have you ever heard of Thomas Edison? Like 1,000 times till he got the light bulb to work? Like, you need some perseverance. So I love what you were talking about with skills versus book smart. Like, you can look up a lot of stuff on Google these days that I couldn't have looked up because I only had the Encyclopedia Britannica when I was in school.
Oh, I remember.
But yes, the skills are far more important. And we see that. And when we were talking a little bit about the pandemic earlier, that's where we're seeing the major issues is the kids coming in without the ability to share and negotiate and to have arguments with one another without them ending in like just crazy tears and things of that nature, because they've been separated, they've been isolated, and they haven't been in situations that are uncomfortable where they have to navigate that. And those are the skills later on. Like, no one's going to remember your test scores, but like, if you start screaming when someone like takes your muffin and you're 30, that's not going to play very well.
No, it certainly is not. It certainly is not. And I know that the past 2 years has been very detrimental. And I see it firsthand all the time with kids that do not really know how to communicate effectively anymore, because they've been so isolated, and they're scared. Like, they are scared to put one foot wrong in that something is going to go wrong and something's not going to be okay. And then someone's going to be mad at them. Like, when I was a child, if my parents told me, they said, you better not start a fight. My dad said, and like my mother didn't really have much to do with the discipline side of things, but my dad always told me, he said, you better not start a fight. But if somebody starts a fight, you better be able to finish it. And I mean, I never started a fight. I never got into a physical fist fight, but it was that idea of being able to properly stand up for myself. Now, I mean, not necessarily physically, but like verbally, especially. Because girls will fight verbally. And I had quite a few verbal and with the rise of social media, as I was a teenager when social media just started coming out. So that was something that was very much on the up and up. And so, my parents were very careful about how they wanted me to go about engaging with social media. I didn't actually even get like a Facebook account until I was 18, because my parents realized, they were like, this is not something that's positive for you, right? And this is not something that is good for your development. But in terms of being able to stand up for ourselves, in terms of being able to effectively voice an opinion, even if that opinion like differs from another person, it's okay. And I find that with kids these days, especially the ones that have been so isolated and have been so closeted with everything that's gone on, and they're so scared. Like when I was a child, I was allowed to communicate if I did not like something, respectfully, of course. Like there's a way to communicate respectfully, and there's a way to communicate so that the other person does not feel as though you are degrading them. But it was okay to disagree. Nowadays, it's almost like kids can't really handle, and I argue a lot of adults too, can't really handle that disagreement sort of thing. Like when did it become that we are not able to disagree with each other respectfully, and we all have to kind of be on the same page? We don't, as you said with your administrators earlier, right? Like there's nothing wrong with a little bit of healthy debate. There's nothing wrong with people not necessarily agreeing all the time. If everyone agrees all the time, I would argue that's more of a problem than a good thing.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I've started to try and take the mindset. Like I read, I really have gotten the last few years into a lot about stoicism and sort of looking at situations like, how do I respond and react to this in a stoic, like rational manner, right? Because on any given day, someone's mad at me. I mean, I'm the principal of a school with 570 kids. Someone is angry about something. And a lot of times I just end up being the receiver of the anger or the frustration, even if it has nothing to do with me. And so I've been working to really master okay, this isn't about me, and maybe sometimes it is, but like how to sort of respond and react to those things. And it's interesting because something that I've been trying to do is when I know I'm going to go into an uncomfortable situation, or I already know going in someone disagrees with me or my approach, whatever, I say to myself before I go in, like, what are you going to do to have your mind changed? And I go in asking myself, have your mind changed? So it allows me to open up instead of kind of holding on to my opinion and like, I'm just going to hold on to that opinion and I'm not going to listen to anyone else. I have to say to myself, like, you're going to go in asking to have your opinion changed. And there have been times when I've gotten to the other side of something and I'm like, okay, you know what? I see that. I get that. And then there are other times when I'm like, yeah, I'm still where I am, but it's allowed me, I think as an administrator to back away from dominating a lot of conversations, whether they're with faculty and staff or parents, because I'm like, okay, you need to go in from the position of, I want this person to change my mind. I want this person to enlighten me. I want this person to educate me, as instead of, I have to change this person's mind. I have to do this. And it's been very helpful, but I don't know that our children are learning that skill. And let's face it, like, you don't have to do a lot of stuff you don't want to anymore. Like, I mean, I guess I'm 50. When I grew up, there were like 4 television stations. You couldn't fast forward through things. You didn't have Netflix. You couldn't binge watch an entire season of The Crown. Like, you had to wait. There was just waiting and waiting. I mean, we didn't even have answering machines in the beginning. And so there was a lot of forced patience and a lot of accepting other people's their issues and their bad parts and all this kind of stuff, because you didn't have another choice. Nowadays, I can go to my Spotify and I can listen to whatever I want. And I can go to my podcast and I can listen to whatever I want. And I can have confirmation bias everywhere. Everyone agrees with me because I'm only listening to stuff. And it makes us, I think, Kimberly, less tolerant of other people's opinions because we're only surrounding ourselves with one. And that's something that concerns me. And I saw a lot in the United States where then we equate a difference of opinion with the person themselves. And a lot of times I'm like, I have people I disagree with all the time, but I adore them. I don't have to agree. I mean, I've been married for almost 20 years. I don't agree with my husband on everything. And I'm sure he doesn't agree with me on everything. Yeah, but he's still, and hopefully I'm a good person. So I don't know where that debate, at least in the United States, I'm not sure about Canada.
Oh no, it's worse here. Trust me, it's worse here.
Yeah, people need to just back it down and realize that just because you have an opinion that you disagree with someone doesn't make that other person a bad person or make you a bad person necessarily. And that's something that I wish we did a better job overall, like society, of teaching our children to navigate those waters better.
Mm-hmm. Of being able to, and I tell my kids all the time, like, you don't have to accept somebody else's perspective as like the be all and end all, and like you're going to follow what they say and et cetera, and you're completely in agreement. You don't have to accept them. You don't have to accept their opinion, but you do have to accept them as a person. It's about accepting the person and tolerating the agreement. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, because it's a difference of opinion. As you said, like, we disagree with people all the time. I have people I disagree with on a regular basis about important things. And there are some things that are, I would say, lines in the sand. There's other things that are lines in the concrete that are not moving. But it doesn't mean that just because somebody else has a different line in the concrete or a different line in the sand, it doesn't mean that I don't still respect that person for like who they are, and that I can't still have a decent civil conversation with that person. And it might be a little bit uncomfortable. They might not be my favorite person to hang out around, but I'm still going to give that person the respect that they deserve, because they are another human being and that's what they deserve. And I think you're right when you say that a lot of our kids these days don't have that sort of skill or have that sort of mindset. And I really do believe that that's a large part of society as a whole, as to how we've structured society in the various institutions. I mean, various schools they're not necessarily as involved as yours seems to be. They don't have that sort of more hands-on approach and the integrative approach with the parents either. Then you get out into society and you have everybody who's fighting about this, that, and everything else, because everything is a war zone these days. And nobody bothers to sit down and say, hey, wait a second, like you're just, Joe from down the street, right? Like there's no respect anymore for having different opinions. It's, I have to change everybody's mind. And for myself, when I go into conversations, I mean, I don't have the mindset that you necessarily have of like, I want this person to change my mind, but I do go into all my conversations with, I want to learn something from this person. What is it that they can offer me that I can learn from them? Because even kids, like even my students will teach me things. Like parents of children will teach me things. Like you can always learn something from everybody. But if you go into it with a mindset of, with a closed mindset of, this is the way things are and this is the way things have to be, I think that's a very dangerous place to be, because then your mind is not open to new information and those neural pathways are closed.
Yes. They're going to start pruning themselves away. Absolutely. And again, you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment, because if the expectation is you're only going to surround yourself with like-minded people all the time, you're going to end up alone at some point, because something that's so beautiful about being a human being is that, I mean, outside of the rare identical twins, no one looks the same, when no one sounds the same. Like that's the beauty of the human race. And to think that we would want all of a sudden for everybody to be the same, it just doesn't seem to make sense. But I think unfortunately we're not modeling, when I say we, it's like a societal thing, but we're not modeling for our kids what that respectful like discourse and dialogue look like, because they're seeing those arguments on social media and things of that nature, when people can hide behind a Twitter, name or whatever it is and not have to take responsibility. I mean, if I call you and I say something really mean, even though I'm not looking at your face, I have to receive your reaction on the phone. But when you're behind a computer or you're on a smartphone and you're just typing away, we've sort of removed ourselves from the interpersonal connection. And it makes it easier to be insulting. It makes it easier to be mean. And I think that's not the right role modeling for our kids. And I mean, I talk to a lot of parents about it, because they'll even say to us, like, there's bullying going on and this is a Catholic school and we shouldn't have bullying. And I'm like, you're right. and we have our virtue of the month and our commandments of courtesy. And trust me, we are not teaching those values here. But unfortunately, a lot of our kids go home, and it's not the parents per se, but everything that they're seeing from the news to social media to what they're seeing on the computer is sending a message that in some ways directly contradicts the value system that we're trying to push,
that you're trying to
for
implement.
7 hours a day. Right. And implement at school. And they're butting up against one another. And that is a difficult battle to fight for a lot of different reasons. But we will, we're going to keep doing it and keep working with the kids to teach them how to fight fair and to argue well, and to not necessarily accept other opinions, but to accept other opinions where you don't have to agree with them, but you have to have a level of respect for that difference of opinion.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely. I have the mentality that it's tolerance, not acceptance. But I think that's pretty much the same thing that you're saying. You don't have to accept the opinion as like, okay, this is now what I'm going to do and now what I'm going to follow, but you have to respect it in the sense that like, this is this person's opinion and that's their choice and that's their opinion. And if you really think about it, nobody ever, I like what you said about teaching kids to argue well and teaching kids to debate like in a healthy manner. Because as adults, I find that that's a really crucial skill that's lacking. And I mean, kids too, but I can't blame the kids. If you can talk to someone as opposed to arguing with them, or you can debate with someone as opposed to arguing with them, like no one ever changed anyone's mind by calling someone names or by saying that they're an idiot or dumb or whatever. Like no one ever had a positive effect on someone like that. Right. By using those sorts of methods, going back to the saying of you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, that motto should be applied to how we speak to people as well, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see these people screaming in each other's faces and it's like, yeah, that's not going to achieve anything.
that's not the problem.
I understand people. No, and I understand how people get emotional about things. I'm not saying that even practicing stoicism, not that I'm never emotional about something. It's just working through that, so that when I do have a reaction to something, it's a reaction that I feel that I'm sort of in control in, as opposed to allowing the emotion to control me. And if that's something that I can work with my students in helping them to develop that level of maturity, then I will definitely feel as if, or even my own children, I have, achieved something, because people just seem to get pretty hysterical these days about
absolutely anything.
Pretty much everything.
Yep. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much for being on this podcast with me. We were intending on talking about like advocacy and the school system, and look where we ended up. We're talking about skills and life skills and stuff. So we'll definitely have to have you back. Thank you so much for joining me. I
would love that.
I really appreciate your
Kimberly,
expertise. It's been a pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Kimberly. I would love to come back. And I mean, just like you said, the social media or whatever, there were so many topics that we touched on that, I mean, they just deserve their own podcast. You're right. Just like I'll give it in service for like an hour, and I'm like, actually, this could be 6 hours, but I'm just going to have to
I'm just going to have to excuse myself. Yeah.
I'm just going to have to just give you as much as I can. We touched on so many interesting things. You are so knowledgeable, and you are so passionate about what you're doing. It was really, really fun to chat with you and to learn more about you. And I'd love to come back on another time.
Well, then I'll make it happen.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I appreciate it.
You got it. Have a great day.
If you have any comments or questions, either about this issue or others that have come up for you, you can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.